So for anybody who just joined, we're doing a quick Mentimeter poll. Some of you may be doing a lot of these in your classes at the start of the semester. So apologize, but now you're on the other side of it, right? Because I created this poll. So please just jump on in and I'll share my screen in just a minute once we give a couple more people a chance to weigh in.
Vicky, can you or someone else repost the poll for those of us who, I'm sorry,
Oh,
came in
sorry,
a
that's
bit too
right.
late?
That's right. It
Thank
doesn't,
you.
it doesn't, hopefully you could,
That worked. Thank you.
yeah, sorry about that. I always forget when you join, you don't get the whole history of the chat. Okay, so I think I'll go ahead and share my screen so that you all can see the poll. Can you all see our word cloud that you produced? So we have lots of different things: time with loved ones, meaningful work, breathing, connection, space, mattering, music, exercise, strength, faith, thinking positively, gratitude, social supports, therapy, walking my dogs, nature, lots of things that help you thrive, right? So we're not only resilience researchers, but we also think about our own resilience. So thanks so much for participating in that. I think that Sherry and I thought this would be a nice way to kick things off, to kind of center our own lived experience, but also because what I notice when I look at that word cloud is that there are a number of things that may appear in our research, but there's also things that we seldom measure, right? Like I will say walking my dogs every day keeps me very, very grounded. And I've never seen that on an item that I've either used in a resilience study or, or that I've been asked. So, and it's probably one of the number one things at the start of the semester that's helping me get from one day to the next. So I think it's just a nice reminder that the work we all have to do together is still large. And that's why we're super excited to be hosting this virtual meeting to keep our work together going as a consortium, bring you all together to continue the collaborations. Sherry, did you want to say anything else? Do we want to update about the scoping review? Wasn't sure if you wanted to say some things before we jump in.
Sure. Well, I think we should let people introduce themselves so that everyone gets to hear who's on the
Okay.
call and where they're from. And yeah, the first special issue is coming right along. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But we've got 6 papers accepted and 4 more that are close to being accepted. And so we hope that will be out before the end of the semester. And we are trying to arrange another one, which we will come back and revisit again at the end. So we're super excited about how that turned out. It's going to be amazing. But yeah, do we just want to do, what do you think the fastest way to do introductions is?
I think probably the fastest way is we'll call on people.
Okay. Do you want to do that?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. So I think by now everybody knows Sherry and myself, but just in case you don't, I'm Vicky. I'm in New Jersey at Rutgers. Selena, you're next.
Awesome. Can you hear me? Okay,
Yep.
cool. Yeah, so my name is Selena. I'm a senior at Sewanee and I'm a psych major and I am an intern for Dr. Hamby.
Thanks for joining us, Selena. Deb.
Hi, I'm Deb Leggett. I am a counseling faculty for Walden University.
Great, thanks, Deb. Matthew S.
Hello, I'm Matthew. I am a former student of Dr. Hamby's from Swanee, and I just started a master's program at in Chattanooga, Tennessee.
Awesome. Liz, Michelle,
Hi,
nice to see you.
I am, yes, it's good to see you too. I am Elizabeth Michelle Smith, and I am a research scientist at the University of New Hampshire, and I was one of Vicky's graduate students.
Brittany,
Hello, I am a fourth year student in a clinical psychology doctoral program at the University of Mississippi. And I'm also a research assistant at the Central Arkansas VA under Dr. Marcy Weber, who's also on this call.
super awesome. Jose,
Uh, I am from Portugal. I am a faculty member, um, and I teach issues of adult development and aging, and resilience interests me a lot. And I want to be connected with you and Sherry, and within this group is great. Thank you.
great. Thank you. Shireen,
Hey everyone. I'm a faculty member at Tel Chai College in Israel, who is just on the brink of regional war. So resilience is very important for us to study.
thank you for joining us. Marcy,
Hi, I'm a clinical psychologist at the Central Arkansas VA and a professor at the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences, and also a former student of Sherry's. That's one.
Matt, H.
Hi, I'm Matt, also a former student of Sherry and Vicky's between undergrad and graduate school, and I'm now a clinical psychologist and teach at Francis Marion University in South Carolina.
Awesome. Taylor,
Hi everyone. I am a recent clinical psychology PhD graduate with Katie Howell at University of Memphis and now Susan Yoon's postdoctoral scholar at Ohio State. Happy to be here with you all.
thanks for joining us. Melissa Wells, so another UNH.
Hi, I'm Melissa. I am from UNH. I attended one of Sherry's sessions this summer in July, and I'm super happy to be here today.
Glad to have you. Jackie,
Hi, everyone. I'm the Associate Dean for Faculty Advancement at the University of Kentucky's College of Social Work, and formerly I was at Rutgers. So nice to see you, Vicki and Caroline.
wonderful. Thanks. Carmen,
I am Carmen Monico, an associate professor at North Carolina A&T, HBCU in the South. And great to be here.
Welcome. Jacoba,
Hi everyone, I'm Jacoba Rock. I'm social work faculty at Boise State University in Idaho.
awesome. Welcome. Alyssa,
Hi, everybody. I am the Director of Survivor Engagement at the Center on Human Trafficking Research and Outreach at the University of Georgia, and will be a PhD grad hopefully in May.
awesome. Thanks for joining us. Wyatt,
I'm a first-year master's student at Cleveland State University in Ohio.
awesome. Welcome. Danielle,
Hi, I'm faculty in criminal justice and women's gender and sexuality studies at Boston University.
super. We have a growing group here. This is great. Cecilia,
Hello, this is Cecilia Avison. I was introduced to the concept of the Resilience Portfolio at the Conference of Prevention Research Conference, on Violence Prevention Research Conference in July by the University of New Hampshire. And I'm excited to be part of this meeting. Thank you.
great. We're super happy to have you here. Caroline,
She says she's in a loud area and that she's
okay.
Armendaro from Rutgers.
Yep, from Rutgers. Okay, great. Niba,
Hello, my name is Aniba Tahir. I'm 21 years old. I'm currently a master's student in clinical psychology. I'm from Lahore, Pakistan.
great. Thank you so much for joining us. Loretta,
Thank you. I'm Loretta Brady. I'm Manchester, New Hampshire at St. Anselm College, where I direct a community resilience and social equity lab. And I'm participating on a scoping review with a number of folks. And they all fall out of my head, but they're amazing. Rachel and Dennis and Angela and Athena and Ishita. So we're looking at digital resilience in our scoping review project.
Awesome. Fantastic. Maritza. Oh, Maritza may have had to step away. We'll come back. Ruth?
Yeah, hi everyone. I work with the Center for Victims of Torture. I work on resilience programming, also adjunct with Antioch University.
Great. Thank you for joining us. And Shayna.
Yes, hello. Nice to meet everyone. My name's Shayna. I'm currently a postdoctoral research fellow here at the National Center for PTSD in Boston, and my main focus is on trauma and resiliency.
Great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And Maritza is here, but neither the audio or camera are working, but she can hear us. Well, we're glad that you're here, Maritza, and that you can hear us. And we all know about technology, right? So this is really, really great. It is so amazing to have so many people and from different parts of the world and practitioners, researchers, students, all of the above. So we're just super excited to keep this community going and to really, really working to, and Maritza introduces herself in the chat so you can see she is an assistant professor at Georgia State University. So Sherry, you want me to kind of kick off with a little bit of an overview and get us started? Okay. So for those of you who are new and really awesome people coming in from the New Hampshire conference, I'd love it. The Resilience Portfolio Consortium was really founded to bring together resilience scientists at all stages of their career, as well as practitioners who are using the science of resilience to really advance the field in all of the ways that it needs to be advanced, both through research, through education, and through interventions. And one of the things that folks who were involved with the RPC over the last year have been doing is working on a scoping review, as Sherry mentioned, that will be coming out in the journal Trauma, Violence, and Abuse, a way of trying to synthesize and take a look at the state of resilience science and what we currently know. And we've been learning a lot. And many of you are working on other scoping reviews and other projects. And so we're hoping to use this space to not only create connections among research, among resilience folks working on resilience, to provide opportunities for mentoring for people who are looking and for collaboration, right? Because we know that collaboration is sometimes not always easy to find, and also to move the field forward. And so what we thought we would do today is start moving us towards one of our goals of the RPC, which is about improving measures for assessing resilience, measures that could be useful in clinical and educational settings, as well as measures that can be used in research. And so what Sherry and I thought we would do is start off just again to get us grounded in some common frameworks and language, which is the Resilience Portfolio Model. And so we thought that we would share a little bit about the portfolio model and how it's developed over the years very quickly. And then Sherry's going to talk a little bit, springboard from that into talking about sort of where we are and some of the limitations of how we continue to see resilience being measured, and then try to generate some conversation and connections about some next steps about working on some measurement projects. How did I do, Sherry? Did that pretty good overview? Okay, cool. All right, so I'm going to get us started with just a second. It's coming up in the place on my screen. So, all right. Okay. Now I can share my screen. All right. So hopefully you all can see this. This is, I didn't put my name on this because this is mainly from Sherry's slides, but These are some things that Sherry has worked on with many of us who have worked with Sherry know about the Resilience Portfolio Model, which was developed by Sherry and myself and originally with our colleague John Rich, but we've really been trying to move it forward, as have all of you, over time. And it's really focused in on the idea that resilience is not a personality trait. So some of the ways in which resilience has been operationalized has been this sort of trait, this character, this thing that you have that you carry with you across the lifespan that kind of helps buffer you. But one of the tenets of the resilience portfolio model is really the idea that resilience isn't a personality trait, that it might be related to some more stable factors, but that really we are interested in modifiable strengths, things that people can cultivate that can help them to lead better lives. So in that vein, that we really think about resilience as a process that is over time. It's not just like emotional toughness or one thing. And it's many things, it's many domains. The Resilience Portfolio Model began with 3 domains. I'll talk a little bit more about these in a minute. But we've most recently, at the end of doing all of these scoping reviews and working with different research teams, really felt that we needed to break out this environmental piece and to talk about what we mean by that in just a minute. So this is sort of the classic Resilience Portfolio Model slide. That the idea is that there's lots and lots of strengths. And actually one of the early limitations of the resilience science literature was people sort of studying one strength at a time. Like, let's just study social support, or let's just study hope, or, which is fine. But what we really are coming to understand is that in the same way that we need to understand the range of adversities that people are exposed to and how they're interconnected, we also need to understand the range of strengths that people have. And so the original 3 domains of the Resilience Portfolio Model, as we did kind of very big scoping reviews and began to look at measures and things like that, is that a lot of the things that people were measuring seemed to coalesce in regulatory strengths, about regulating emotions, keeping to a routine, pursuing goals. We can think about interpersonal strengths, maybe the thing that comes to mind most if we think about our word cloud and people talking about connection, being with others, friends, family, animals, right? Resources from all kinds of relationships, including community. This is really where we tend to situate the social ecology. So when people talk about collective efficacy, sense of community, school climate, those kinds of things, we tend to put those into the interpersonal realm because it's really centering relationships and connections. Meaning making, which tends to be one of the lesser studied areas, is really about connecting to something larger than yourself. Dedication to a cause, commitment to a role as being a teacher, a parent, a code or values or ethics, religious or spiritual faith, things that kind of get you outside of yourself. And then most recently, originally in the Resilience Portfolio Model, environment was either sort of looped into, in some ways, the interpersonal, or maybe it was sort of in resources in the broader model. But we really, more and more people are trying to do research on the built environment and on the natural environment. And so we've really started to pull this out as a 4th domain of the Resilience Portfolio Model, that it's things like access to green spaces. Built environment are things like walkability, including, how far is the closest grocery store, and is the closest place for you to shop, or the only accessible place a convenience store, or can you go somewhere that has more affordable fresh vegetables and things like that? How far is it, or possible is it for you to get to a park? Those kinds of things. And that's been interesting for us because I think it also pushes us out of the sort of social science box of always trying to ask people survey questions and measuring what's in their head, and actually starting to measure what is in the spaces around them and how that might be important and relevant for resilience. This is something, if you've been to any of Sherry's talks, and or especially if Sherry and I presented together, but this is the important slide where we really talk about how when you measure strengths, even if you're measuring something like trauma symptoms, and we know that trauma dosage and exposure to adversity is very, very significant, you still, when you measure strengths, are explaining more about trauma symptoms by understanding strengths equal or maybe more than what you're explaining by trauma exposures themselves. And when you look at other kinds of outcomes that are less kind of trauma symptom related and more about well-being, you can see that strengths really starts to win, to be competitive about it, but explain a whole heck of a lot more variance in outcomes. And wow, this is really a lot of what's explaining people's subjective well-being. And so for those of us who are preventionists, who are practitioners, who are working with communities, like, we need to start paying attention to this, because this can be really important to the path moving along. So with the portfolio model, we're really trying to shift people's thinking, that many problems that in the prevention field, for example, are challenges of regulation. And even though it's often seen as self-regulation, we know that environmental and relational supports can help. And so we really want to be starting to pivot to think about strengths and to think about them not just as the absence of anxiety or the absence of depression, the absence of risk, but as really the presence of something, a good something that might be helpful to someone. And here I just put in a few examples. I tend to live mostly in the prevention lane, and so I like to think about these pillars of the resilience portfolio model about different kinds of things: social emotional learning, mindfulness, forest bathing, and green spaces as just some examples of things that contribute to regulation. We can do the same kind of thing when we think about interpersonal, whether we're thinking about bystander skills or mentoring, social norms that we might want to try to change, and thinking about creating meaning, again, on the individual, relational, and so across the ecological model, we can really be thinking about how these different domains of the resilience portfolio model might teach us something about how someone is doing and how we might help them to create a better life for themselves. The other piece of the resilience portfolio model, and again, many of you have seen a couple of these things, but you know, when you look at strengths, it really allows you to intervene in lots of different places. It can help you increase someone's coping responses when something bad happens. It can change their coping responses in general in their life so that they are able to use more positive kinds of strengths that can help promote their well-being, whether or not there's a current acute adversity that they're dealing with. It can just help in general increase their level of well-being, which may kind of help buffer them from some of the negative eroding effects of stress when adversity presents itself. And then there's the idea that some of these resources and assets may in fact end up insulating people from trauma or from future trauma. So again, the resilience portfolio model is really designed to speak to intervention and prevention. It's really designed to go across that spectrum. I'll just finish here by noting that now, in part through Sherry's great mentorship and networks of colleagues like all of you, there are now 10 different data sets that are being worked on, many of which have been published across 23 different outcomes: subjective well-being, health-related quality of life, post-traumatic growth, lots of different sample sizes, and looking at lots and lots of different strengths, so that we're starting to be at a place, and this gets us to where we're headed today, we're starting to be at a place where we can look at the kinds of strengths that seem to be the winners. For example, in sense of purpose, which is a meaning-making strength, ends up being sort of a number one for 11 different outcomes, 11 studies. And so these are the kinds of things that seem like, even though the portfolio approach suggests that it's not just any one strength that's going to help you, the idea is not to design a portfolio that has every possible strength in the universe, right? But to maybe tailor them a bit better so that we can be helping to tailor our prevention and our intervention efforts. So I think that I will stop there, because I think that's a pretty good overview of the portfolio model. We can get to questions and things, because I know Sherry has some thoughts that she wants to share as well.
Yeah, so now I want to kind of pivot to where we think next steps need to go in terms of the science. Can you see my slides, Vicky? Yeah.
Yes.
Great.
Yes, we're good, Chair.
And so we want to start thinking about that. All sounds good. Like, what does that look like if you're constructing studies, and where does that leave us in terms of evaluating the work that's been done? And so I just want to start a little bit with some context about how neglected this is as a topic of research, even after 40 some odd plus years of research on violence and trauma. And I'm going to start with what is probably like the most obvious observation I could possibly make, which is that people who have been victimized want to feel better. And in fact, as you know, as Vicky just showed, it is really possible for them to feel better too, and that we know that resilience is the most common outcome after trauma. Even after really extreme cases of trauma, most people don't develop PTSD. And not only are they not meeting clinical criteria, but even by, our usual measures of doing well in the world, most of them are doing pretty well. And remarkably, we actually know very little about how this happens. What do we study? And I mean, and in this, I definitely include me. I mean, I spent 20 years, and most of my first 20 years in my career, this is what I studied. I studied a lot of stuff on rates and risk factors and negative consequences. And that was hugely impactful scientific research. I personally think it was the most impactful social science research that's ever been conducted, that it really transformed our world in terms of laws, in terms of schools, in terms of creating things like rape crisis hotlines and domestic violence shelters. But it hasn't done that much in terms of contributing to a basic science of healing. And I just want to take like a quick minute just to show you like how disproportionate this focus is. So Susan Yoon and I went back and looked at papers published in Psychology of Violence, and we found that more than 3/4 of them were completely and entirely deficits based and didn't mention any positive thing that a survivor might have anywhere in them. And then even in that sliver of ones that had at least one strength somewhere in the paper, most of them are what I would call a basic science of prevention, in that they were looking at things that would minimize the risk that somebody would get involved in perpetration or victimization, and not very much on healing, which is about what helps people get back to a state of thriving after a victimization or other trauma. And so that led that only 1 out of every 15 papers in Psychology of Violence focuses on what you might call a science of healing. I think this has led to, I think this is really probably the number one reason that so many of our interventions really are so poor at accomplishing what we're trying to accomplish. I mean, we've invested millions of dollars and who knows how many other resources, and lots of programs that don't work very well. A lot of different domestic violence programs, a lot of violence prevention, suicide prevention. Suicide rates are higher than they were now when I started in graduate school after 40 years of suicide prevention. And most of these things have little evidence that they really make a big difference in people's lives. And I really think it's because we're lacking this basic science of healing. We don't know what helps people overcome trauma. So when people go and create these interventions, they're basically just making them up. It's like, well, maybe this will help, or maybe that'll help, or maybe this is what helped me, but they don't know if this is typically like how people overcome trauma. And so there's this huge gap of like a basic science foundation to guide our intervention or our prevention programs too. It's not much better for prevention. And one of the ways that this shows up is definitely in resilience research in particular. And I was thinking about it while I was getting ready for this talk today. I can't think of a single other concept anywhere in social science where there is this huge level of disconnect between the theories and the measures. I mean, as some of you know, I spent a lot of my early career working on measurement development for different kinds of violence. And if I looked at a bunch of bullying measures or a bunch of domestic violence measures or something like that, I would be like, yeah, this one could be better or that one could be better for sure. But I would never look at the bullying measure and go, that's really not asking questions about bullying. But that's kind of where we are with resilience measures. So it's not just our work on the resilience portfolio model. If you look at any of the major resilience theorists and their models, I mean, I obviously think the resilience portfolio model is the best one of these. I do not have an unbiased opinion of that, but there are a lot of them also have a lot of common elements with the resilience portfolio model. They pretty much all think that there are multiple dimensions involved in resilience. Almost all of them have at least some kind of ecological input where they consider social support or something like that. It's all, kind of similar. I mean, they don't have the specific languages, specific domains that we do, but the basic idea about it being a multidimensional process is definitely similar across these approaches. But our measures of resilience pretty much are all developed based on these much older ideas about resilience when we used to talk about it as a personality trait, and they're very individualistic. They're really grounded in US mainstream culture, and they are based on some kind of kooky ideas, like the idea that some kids are somehow invulnerable when there are not any invulnerable kids out there. I mean, what a ridiculous idea. And so just to drill down and take a look at a couple of them, I mean, there's obviously a bunch, but the one that's far and away the most widely used is the Connor-Davidson scale. And this is the 10-item short form that I think has really come to be dominant. And you can tell, like, if you put your resilience portfolio hat on, you can see how limited this is because all of these items basically come from the regulatory domain. So the only ideas that you are going to capture if you use this as a resilience measure is how people are overcoming trauma through better management of their behaviors or their emotions. The first 5 items are more or less coping items. The next 4 are basically indicators of perseverance or determination or endurance. And then the one at the bottom is an emotion regulation item. And so this is also kind of nutty because if you then have this hypothesis that, oh, like perseverance is related to resilience, and you use a perseverance questionnaire, well, they're going to have like the exact same content in those items about being able to achieve goals despite obstacles and stuff like that. And of course, you're going to get this correlation because these things are just kind of jumbling together some completely untested ideas about what the main ingredients are for resilience. So whether they intended to do this or not, their untested idea is that the only thing you need to be resilient or to overcome trauma is good regulatory skills. But we now have lots and lots of data that shows that that is completely wrong. If anything, I think one of my students looked up citations to some of these scales a year or two ago, and what came in number 2 at that time was the brief resilience scale. And if anything, it's actually even worse. It's just 6 items, and it is completely atheoretical. It's just basically 6 different ways of saying that I can bounce back quickly after hard times. Maybe you could say that these imply some kind of regulatory elements. My students and I do usually code this as loosely regulatory when we come across it, but I think they're even less specific than the Connor-Davidson, and they're mostly just things about whether you're a resilient person or not. And the problem with a scale like this, like if we all put our clinical hats on, even if you're not a clinician, like just put your like helping person hat on, is that you can't draw any conclusions from this except that it'd be better to be the kind of person who bounces back. And I think that that is one of the reasons why we don't know very much about how people get to be resilient, is because we've been relying on questionnaires like these. There are some others that are a little bit better than these, and they do at least include like a few items on social support or meaning making, but they still all tend to have them lumped together in these like completely atheoretical and untested combinations that still tend to overemphasize regulatory strengths. So what Vicky and I think that we should be studying is something that is a lot more fine-grained and specific. And so this is where the scoping reviews are going to come in. I mean, I just can't say like how thrilled we are about how those have turned out, and we are so excited to be sharing them with everybody in the next, hopefully within the next, I would say maybe 4 to 6 weeks. And we think that there's a ton of really great ideas, in there that we're going to be able to build on prior work. And again, I think what some of these scoping reviews are going to show is some of the stuff that Vicky put up on the mechanisms there, that there's been too much focus, honestly, in terms of therapy as well as in terms of research on like coping with the specific trauma, but that third approach where you can just kind of just go right around the trauma and go directly to making people feel better, I think you'll see that a lot of the strengths more or less fall into that category. This is just a partial list. We're still digesting the scoping review results, and we are hoping to look at some patterns across them in our introduction for the special issue. But here's just a few of the ones that have come out. So like nationwide meaning making was a great one from the one in Kosovo about thinking about meaning making in a more collectivist culture and is more of a community process and not just an individual one. A couple of them have talked about opportunities, including one Selena worked on, to socialize, not just receive social support. Some of the more collectivist ideas like family solidarity, humor. I mean, in our own lives, don't we all use humor to cope with lots of things? And it's amazing how humorless mainstream resilience research and really not just resilience research, but all mainstream work with violence and trauma is. The environmental stuff that Vicky already mentioned, one and Matt's Hagler's scoping review that is in press now, that he took the lead on, working with unhoused LGBTQ youth. Some of the things they really talked about were chances to express their identity in authentic ways in safe spaces, and getting involved in activism and resisting oppression. And these are the kinds of things that you don't see too much about in resilience literature, but these are the kinds of things I think could really move the field forward, and not just in terms of the basic science, but in terms of translating what we know into different approaches to intervention and working with communities. I mean, if you think about like something like this for like Marcy, like working with veterans or things like that, I mean, I just think could really be powerful ways to change. And then once we have all of these strengths, and this is what we've been trying to do for the last several years, but we really need to start sorting them out, because there are a lot of good things in the world, which is a lovely thing about the world for sure. But we also need to be able to prioritize like which of these are better. I mean, in the quantitative work that we've done out of life paths, even that Vicky showed you a glimmer of, we've looked at 65 different constructs for psychosocial strengths. And honestly, I mean, kind of the good news about it is that probably 55 of them are not very interesting. They have not turned out to be explain very much variance. They're often not even significant. There have been a few that have been significant in the wrong direction. But I think that's great if we keep our clinical hats on and we're trying to think about crafting interventions and smartly investing our resources. It's great that we're going to be able to narrow this down. I think we can definitely start narrowing it down from some of the work on like mainstream types of stuff that have been done and then so we need this kind of double-edged approach I'll get to in a minute, but we definitely want to start rank ordering these, like which of these things is more important. Vicky already kind of gave told you all that meaning making is the one that's probably turned out to be most important for us, which makes the fact that all of these resilience questionnaires are full of regulatory items even more, ironic or something. And then the great news about this is that there's already this big literature, much of it also from the positive psychology field, where you can, if you want to boost emotion regulation, or if you want to boost sense of purpose, or if you want to boost social support, we actually already have a lot of interventions that are good at doing those kinds of things. And we need to get these interventions tied more to this basic science of healing and being like, well, most people who are doing well after being exposed to trauma have a lot of X, Y, and Z. And when we have all these interventions that are great at promoting X, Y, and Z, and they do not look that much like cognitive behavioral therapy or any of the other interventions. In fact, I don't think that cognitive behavioral therapy personally should be considered the gold standard anymore. And I also think that these could be sources, again, if you think about, social activism or family solidarity or humor or things like that, those could be inspirations for interventions that better target some of these strengths that we have not paid that much attention to, and also could be like a great place for future work. So I'm talking fast because we're hoping to have a few minutes for discussion and stuff like that. So this is my last slide we want to talk about next steps, and this is where we're going to open it up in a minute. So we're looking for we're definitely interested in more scoping reviews. We think there's a lot to be done to synthesize that literature. But in terms of measurement, we are looking for teams, and we're hoping to do what we did with the scoping reviews and just do some matchmaking and help you guys find each other and form teams together who can develop or test measures for some of the intriguing concepts. We're going to be able to share a lot more information about what some of those concepts are from the scoping reviews that we've done so far. I will note that I think a lot of the ones that are interesting and unique came from qualitative research. And so a lot of the ones that I really would love to see more work done on don't have any decent measures out there to represent them. As Vicky mentioned, we've got the environmental domain, and we are still at a pretty early stage in figuring out good self-report measures to capture that, because sometimes in like urban studies and environmental psychology and fields like that, they go out and they do things like, measure green spaces with drones and stuff like that, which I do think is super cool. But obviously, for a lot of purposes, we are going to need to have self-report ways of capturing some of that data. We're also interested in looking for partners who can test the next phase of some of the promising ones. We're thinking about trying to copy Murray Strauss's, for those of you who might know Murray's work on the international dating violence study, is they worked together and put together a survey that he then shared with teams from all around the world. I think he got more than 50 different teams to do it and do some like limited data sharing so that you could see across them like what kinds of in that case risk factors for dating violence were working across different settings. But what we want to do is try to create a strengths-based version of that. And then we just talked earlier this week, and we kind of sent out our first little ping this morning on identifying an outlet for a second special issue. And that special issue would would be open to reviews for sure, but would also take quantitative and qualitative papers is what we're envisioning. So Vicky, I guess I will pass it back to you, or we'll just open it up for questions, or we're trying to figure out what the best way. I mean, we can definitely do it in April when we're in person, but we do want to figure out what the best way to be to help create some teams or start letting people know like who's working on what or who might be interested in what. I don't know. What do you think, Vicky?
Yeah, so I think maybe we'll just start to see if anybody wants to jump in with a thought or a question. Maybe get started with that, and then we can think about one. Let's start with that. I have some ideas for as we wrap things up for how we might continue to do the matchmaking in a way that I think was successful for the scoping reviews. But let's just see what folks are thinking about with this and thinking about the focus on measurement and some things like that.
Dr. Banyard, I had just a thought that came to mind. And I don't know, this may be helpful for like thinking about different ways of measuring resilience. But whenever I hear the term like thinking of resilience as a process, as a dynamic process, my mind always goes to multiple forms of measurement for a complex process that's unfolding. Like trying to have one kind of measure seems really difficult for me to wrap my head around, even though that is really useful, having one solid measure. And particularly for the qualitative coding, something that I haven't seen, and maybe it's out there, is like qualitative coding schemes for resilience measures. And I think that's an interesting line of research that some of our qualitative researchers might look into. But yeah.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Thinking about whether there might be some sort of qualitative framework that might be helpful for connecting qualitative studies across projects, or I think that's a really super interesting idea. And Sherry and I kind of thought we might use some of these upcoming RPCs now that we're trying to get more regular quarterly time, to encourage some of that. And Deb, yes, thanks. You put in this, that's what I was thinking about, right? The spreadsheet, which we used on Google Documents for the RPC, that we might use that to help people connect around things they're already measuring or things they're wanting to measure. But Sherry, you look like you were going to say something.
Oh, I was just gonna, yeah, I think the spreadsheet could be a good idea, or we might have to send out some more message. I know there were a bunch of people who couldn't be here today who are interested in working on this too, and that's why we are recording. So trying to let people do some digesting, and we're trying to organize, create some bigger list of what the people in the scoping reviews came up. There's also been some interest in like getting using our interview to do more qualitative research in different populations, and we're certainly open to doing that as well and sharing that.
This is Marcy. I had a thought. I mean, what you shared, Sherry, that a lot of the most interesting strengths, or I forget what word you used, were coming from the qualitative findings. That was definitely the case for the military veterans review that I led. Some of the ones that I could even best envision building an intervention around were from the qualitative studies and not the quantitative. That said, we didn't have as many studies, at least in our pool, that were qualitative. So as I was kind of thinking about next steps, I wonder if one thing might be, like each of us are, I think most people on this call were involved in the scoping reviews. So we probably have kind of a list of articles that we're sort of promising around some of these different strengths that need more work, or especially the qualitative studies that might need a quantitative measure developed around their findings. And I'm just wondering if there would be a way or a good reason to maybe pool some of those across the different reviews. Like I'd be happy to share with you all the list, of these qualitative studies around interpersonal strengths that seemed like we need to measure about these. But those are just the military veteran studies. There might be, someone else might have a list of interpersonal strengths from qualitative studies for some other population. And so sort of, I don't know, reorganizing some of what we've already done could maybe be a useful step for kind of honing in on promising strengths from the qual work that need a quantitative measure about them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think those are all really good ideas. I mean, there was huge differences across the different topics about how much of it was qualitative versus quantitative. And I think that yours was probably one of the lower ones on the qualitative. Some of the ones my students have been working on, I mean, go to all the other extreme, like it's almost all qualitative research, interestingly enough. It really depends on the population, and I am starting to see how all of these stereotypes about these different populations are influencing the ways that people approach them with their questions and even their methods. And so, but I do think that that would be interesting to do, and maybe we could try to. I mean, the papers talk about that to some extent, but maybe we should do some outreach about letting people share things from a more methodological lens or a more potential for measurement development lens about what they thought was most promising from their work, or figure out a way to do that. We're still definitely doing a lot of digesting ourselves about the scoping reviews. There's a lot to digest there.
Yeah.
So I love your presentation. Your presentation was fantastic, very inspiring, and so I am motivated, very motivated to promote the use of measures from the protocol and identifying new ones if I can. You during your presentation you said that there are measures that are absent from theory. They are not theoretical.
Mm.
And so you privileged, obviously, and I think you are right in privileging measures that came from some concepts, substantiated concepts or theoretical concepts. But what is the let me name it, what is the theory of resilience? It is only just well-being. For instance, in a certain time you said that healing mechanisms don't need to be trauma specific.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is very interesting. And I think you are right, but at the same time, how do we know in what we are changing during an intervention, or if there are no specificity? You understand?
Yeah, well, I mean, it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be processing or coping with the particular. I mean, I think that is actually the biggest problem with a lot of like domestic violence or rape crisis services or whatever, that there's not much to them after talking about and coping with that specific problem, and about so I think of it in terms of like putting together the pieces of a good life and helping people who have been harmed in some way from trauma, like still figure out how to put together the pieces of a good life and what that looks like. And, you know, and the example I give most often is like yoga. Like yoga, it has a pretty good evidence base for helping people feel better
Yes.
than exposed to trauma. But when you're doing yoga, you're not doing yoga like about your trauma for the most part. You're not,
Yeah, you are
nobody's
right.
talking about the trauma. You're just, you know, stretching and breathing, and maybe you're in a safe space with a bunch of other people who are stretching and breathing if you're doing it in a classroom setting, and all of those things like and lead to your well-being. So our model includes the kind of trauma specific coping that Vicky mentioned briefly, but it focuses, I think we're starting to see in that more of like a positive psychology approach, that focusing on helping people put together the pieces of a good life and not necessarily constantly looking back to processing and reprocessing their trauma is helping people more than uh, like traditional psychotherapy approaches often do.
Okay.
So,
Thank you for your.
yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think so I'm mindful of time. People are dropping off to head to their next meeting. So look for an email from us. We will be using the Resilience Portfolio space, consortium space. And I think, you know, may develop, Sherry and I will put our heads together and develop a way of collecting ideas, much as we did for the scoping reviews. It may be a combination of a spreadsheet, but it may be something as well, to Marcy's point about having people pull and cull from some of the research they're doing about some topics, some areas, and then using that to organize this spreadsheet. So I do my better thinking at the beginning of the day, so I will turn to that tomorrow. But please be looking soon, and certainly before our next virtual meeting,